reminds me of a story from the book. I don't know if you know this, but do you know who Michael Keaton is? He's an actor. He actually got his start on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And Michael Keaton tends to be quite a practical jokester and would often play lots and lots of jokes, as you might imagine, on Mr. Rogers. And such as when he would open up the closet door, he would find various people in substandard amounts of dress. And just to get a reaction out of Fred Rogers. And most of the time, he just kind of played right along with it and wouldn't show any emotion. So anyway, thank you very much for that. This has been a fun series. It really, really has. And I think one of the things that we realized in this sermon series, just how important Fred Rogers was not only to our lives, but our children's lives and to society. And in this sermon series, it helped us realize just how instrumental one person can be. How one person who just is focusing on doing and being their very best, especially with what God has given to them. Well, as we've been doing throughout this whole sermon series, I'm going to start out with a beautiful story from the biography. Rogers' simple routine was articulated in some unexpected quarters. One of Fred Rogers' most loyal fans was Coco, a famously communicative gorilla who appeared in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in 1998. Since Coco had been a faithful viewer of Rogers' program for years, Fred visited her at the Gorilla Foundation in Redwood City, California, in sweater and sneakers. When she saw him, Coco immediately folded him in her long black arms as though he were a child and took off his shoes. Isn't that amazing? Then they conversed in American Sign Language, shared a hug, and took pictures of each other, which you see right here. Fred was particularly delighted when Coco told him she loved him as well as loving her television visits with him. Isn't that amazing? Mr. Rogers' lessons actually translates to the animal kingdom. Today is all about being helpful. And by the time that we are done, not only with this sermon, but really the whole sermon series, we're going to answer that question. What do we do with these lessons? So let's take a step back and look at what drove Fred Rogers. And I'm talking specifically here as to his motivation, his purpose, his reason. And we've talked plenty about the role of God and the church for Mr. Rogers. We've lifted up his Presbyterian upbringing. We've talked about his influential friends and especially his unique childhood that played a role in who Fred McFeely Rogers truly was. But that doesn't explain what sustained his life and his long career. And I'm looking at the why. I mean, why was Fred Rogers really the Mr. Rogers that we saw on TV? Listen to this story. When Fred decided to end the work on the Children's Corner, which was his first television program, and attend seminary, Fred believed it was his calling. He believed that all the pieces he had been fashioning into a new professional life, television, education, the ministry, the puppets, theater, music, could come together in a way that might make the most important work he had ever imagined. He just needed a television program called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Brought everything together. That was his calling. And that calling sustained him when the critics went after him. They accused him of being weak. Others said that he was a homosexual. And others, and this continues to this day, said that he continues to fill children's heads with feel-good mediocrity. But I think it was moments with Coco and the story that I'm about to share that has truly convinced him that what he was doing was a calling and sustained him to do the right thing. There was a 12-year-old boy who had autism that wouldn't speak. He would grunt and say, and just kind of point at things when he would want things. Elaine Lynch of the Make-A-Wish Foundation set up a meeting with the boy, his family, and Fred Rogers. This is what she said. Fred, when he came out to visit with the family, had the king and queen puppets on his hands. And he started talking to the family. And he finally got to the boy who was almost as tall as Fred at that point. The child started speaking in full sentences to the king and queen. Wow. Well, I don't know whether you can imagine what the family was going through at that point, hearing their son speak for the first time. The father started blubbering to the point where he could no longer hold the camera. I took the camera gently from him. Lynch got a Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood crew member to film the rest of the encounter between the puppets, the boy, and his family. Rogers said nothing as himself. He stayed in character as the voices of King Friday the 13th and Queen Sarah Saturday. And Lynch, who later referred to the whole exchange as a miracle, rushed upstairs to get the family their own king and queen puppets for the family. You know, I think it's stories and experiences like these that sustain you against anything. You know, undergirding this helpful ability to all of humanity is this notion, this belief that we're doing all of this as the very hands of Christ. Indeed, this is what Christ would want us to do. Geraldine, would you share with us the passage out of the gospel?
Today's passage is John 13, verses 33 to 35. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You should also love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.
When I hear this passage, I hear this one word: legacy. Our men's group has been following some lessons written by a pastor out in San Francisco by the name of Paul Ortberg, and he's talking about Jesus. And in lesson 1, he says, here is a man who came from complete obscurity to public attention in the blink of an eye, 1 to 3 years. When he died, his tiny failed movement appeared clearly at an end. But 100 years later, he had a greater impact on people than when he was alive. And greater still, 500 years later. And after 2,000 years, he had more followers in more places than ever. You know, we study Jesus, his life, his teachings, because of his legacy. None of us here are a direct eyewitness to Jesus. So what do? We interpret, we reinterpret, we argue, we split off into other churches, we get mad, we go home, all because we can't agree over his legacy. So our goal really, in everything we do, especially as we move forward, is to concentrate on what Christ shall have us do. And doesn't that sound like the legacy of Fred Rogers? He once said, you don't set out to be rich and famous. You set out to be helpful. Here's a man that was raised in incredible wealth. I mean, he had wealth on both sides of his family, and yet he did not concentrate on wealth. He did not concentrate on building that wealth. His goal was simply to be helpful. His biographer said, in this and in most other ways, Fred Rogers' life offers an interesting contrast to the 20th century world consumed by rapid change and inexorable growth. In everything he wrote, in all the programming he produced, in the life of caring, kindness, and modesty that he led, he set a very clear example. His legacy lives in the concept of a caring neighborhood where people watch out for one another, no matter where they come from or what they look like. And you realize this concept goes all the way back to Jesus, to God, to the church, and to the Bible. In fact, every morning when Fred Rogers would get up, it was not as a professional aspect, but very spiritual. He would study passages of interest from the Bible. And then he would visualize who he would be seeing that day, so that he would be prepared to be as caring and giving as it could be. Fred's prayers in those early morning sessions were not for success or accomplishment, but rather for the goodness of heart to be the best person he could be in each of the encounters he would have that day. If you noticed, at the heart of all of this is that idea, that notion, that concept of being helpful. Now, I think for all of us, that sounds like a pretty easy concept for us. We can think about how we are helpful. We hold the door open for someone. Maybe we scoop the sidewalk for someone. Maybe we pick up the bulletins after church so the janitor doesn't have to do that. Or maybe we have an encouraging word to somebody. Or maybe we're just inquisitive as to how someone's family is doing. And this week, I think being helpful is just listening. Listening to people's pain. Listening to people's stories. Listening to people's anxiety about the future. You know, sometimes being helpful is just all about just holding that pain for somebody. And for Fred Rogers, it was very intentional. It was a standard to live by. In fact, he once said, it's one of my favorite quotes, "When I was a boy, I used to think that strong meant having big muscles, great physical power. But the longer I lived, the more I realized that real strength has much more to do with what is not seen. Real strength has to do with helping others." And it's a calling, this idea to help others. And it formulated something that he did every day, but specifically on his TV show. In fact, his coworkers had a word for it. They called it speaking in Freddish. Speaking in Freddish was about anticipating how the young audience might understand and preventing that misunderstanding by providing the right piece of information. What Fred understood and was very direct and articulate about was that the inner life of children was deadly serious to them. There were 9 steps to Freddish translation. First, state the idea you wish to express as clearly as possible and in terms preschoolers can understand. For example, it is dangerous to play in the streets. Second, rephrase in a positive manner, as in, it is good to play where it is safe. Third, rephrase the idea, bearing in mind that preschoolers cannot yet make subtle distinctions and need to be redirected to authorities they trust, as in, ask your parents where it is safe to play. Fourth, rephrase your idea to eliminate all elements that could be considered prescriptive, directive, or instructive, such as, your parents will tell you where it is safe to play. Fifth, rephrase any element that suggests certainty, such as, your parents can tell you where it is safe to play. Sixth, rephrase your idea to eliminate any element that may not apply to all children, such as, your favorite grown-ups can tell you where it is safe to play. Seventh, add a simple motivational idea that gives preschoolers a reason to follow your advice. Your favorite grown-ups can tell you where it is safe to play. It is good to listen to them. Eighth, rephrase your new statement, repeating step 1. Your favorite grown-ups can tell you where it is safe to play. It is important to try to listen to them. And finally, rephrase your idea a final time, relating it to some phase of development a preschooler can understand. So, remember, the phrase started out with, it is dangerous to play in the street. Here's what it is now. Your favorite grown-ups can tell you where it is safe to play. It is important to try to listen to them, and listening is an important part of growing. Wow, this is work. Can you imagine doing that in your teaching? Or in business? Or in talking with your family? Or even your interactions with your neighbors? But for Fred Rogers, it was that important. It was part of his calling to instill hope. Everyone who watched his TV program. This message of hope he actually shared in a holiday episode. He said, I suppose the thing I'd like most to be able to give you is hope. Hope that through your own doing and your own living with others, you'll be able to find what best fits for you in this life. I, for one, wish you good memories of this holiday, and I hope you'll be able to look for all the different ways that people have of showing that they love you. I just love the way that he shapes hope in that message. Because right now, hope is all we've got. We've talked about the fact in the sermon series that some of the greatest leaders are not with us. Apostle Paul, Fred Rogers, John Wesley. They're in the rearview mirror. They're not with us anymore. And all we've got is their writings, and at least with Fred Rogers, we've got his videotapes. And even with Jesus, he tells us, where I'm going, you cannot come. Whereas he's going, we can't go. So as we hear these lessons, we really have a choice. We can say, I sure wish Paul and John Wesley and Fred Rogers and Jesus were with us here today so that he could give us some guidance. Or we can take these lessons on love and blessings. I'm building up the neighbor. I'm being honest with our feelings. I'm being responsible with our choices. I'm being helpful. And we can make them our own. You know, one of the great things about choices, like anything, we can't go back. We can't go back in the past. All we have is the opportunity about what we're doing right here today and moving forward. Now, sure, we can get mad. We can quit. We can throw a tantrum. We can run away. Or we can stay. And we can fight. And we can make these lessons our own. That's my hope. That as we hear these lessons, I invite you to walk with me into the very unknown future. And let us make each day a better day than it was the day before. We're going to show you a clip that comes at the very end of the documentary. And be prepared, it may make you cry. It will probably for me as well, even though I saw it this morning, but it is invaluable as to the idea of legacy. Go ahead.
I can't think how he would feel about the things that have come out that seem to set us back so far.
And I wonder if he wouldn't simply put down his tiger and just stay home. Forget about even trying. He's not a person who would have given up, but this is daunting.
I think he would be trying to mend the split. He would be trying to find some way to find something positive.
When I was a boy and I would hear about something scary, my mother would tell us, always look for the people who are helping. You'll always find somebody who's trying to help.
I think there are a lot of people out there like Fred Rogers. A lot more than we really want to believe.
In response to the question, what would Fred Rogers do? It's not a question that you can't answer. The most important question is, what are you going to do?
From the time you were very little, you've had people who have smiled you into smiling, people who have talked you into talking, sung you into singing, loved you into loving.
When he was giving speeches, he would say, now, think about somebody who's helped you along the way. For 1 minute, I'm going to time you.
Let's just take some time to think of those extra special people. Some of them may be right here. Some may be far away. Some may even be in heaven. No matter where they are, deep down you know they've always wanted what was best for you. They've always cared about you beyond measure and have encouraged you to be true to the best within you.
Thank you. My mother.
How I got to this point
because it was my grandfather's doing.
There was this woman named Viola who used to take care of me when I was little. She was our babysitter.
I thought about Fred.
How about you?
My mother.
Thank you.
I want us to do that right now. I want us to take 1 minute and think about someone that has been helpful to you. 1 minute. Let me end with this story. Arthur Greenwald observed that Rogers's wealth gave him a certain level of security. Yet he chose to dedicate himself to making the world better. He was always focused on what good can come of this. Where do people need help? David Newell, who played Mr. McFeely, notes that Fred really wanted people to grow. That was a big word in his vocabulary. He was always growing emotionally, growing educationally. He would never sit and twiddle his thumbs. Fred was always doing something with the finite time we have here. I hope you use this time to grow. I hope you use this time that we have here to embody these lessons from Jesus and Paul and Wesley and, of course, Mr. Rogers. And I hope you use this time to make these lessons your own. Because I believe that's exactly what they would want. Amen. And as our ushers are getting ready, I'll tell you, I want to thank my wife for